Loop. Okay. I've hit the buttons. I've clicked all the doohickeys. I've upped all the ups and downed all the downs. I believe, ladies and gentlemen, that we are live for yet another episode of WhickTV, a cross-ideological space where we come together to talk about issues both political and cultural, from the silly to the serious. As I often do, I want to remind everyone that I am getting a check from Progressive Victory. I don't think it has anything to do with our content tonight, but you never know. I'm not exactly sure where we're going to go tonight, but I wanted to talk to 𝕾𝖍𝖎𝖙, and he has graciously, as you can see, agreed to join me for a conversation. I'm not entirely sure where we are going to go. We are just kind of going to hold on for the ride, but in general, we're going to talk about therapy, why the left eats its own, how those things relate, and men's issues in general. We'll get into it. We'll have a discussion. We'll have a talk. It should be fun. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, 𝕾𝖍𝖎𝖙. Tuna, how you feeling?
I'm doing great. I have been hammering out. I just finished, like, literally minutes before us going live, a super long script. I've got a video that I just finished. So as soon as we're done doing this, I'm probably going to go live and record that. So I'm pretty excited. It's a productive day to go from that to talking about this, a thing that I've thought about quite a bit. I've read about quite a bit. I've lived quite a bit. It's a good day. Feels nice. How about you? Tell me about yourself. How are you doing?
Tell them about myself. Well, my name's Wick. I like long walks on the beach. No,
what's your relationship with your mother? We're talking therapy today.
I love my mom.
You love your mom?
I love my mom. I think that it's best that we don't live in the same place, right? But I love it when I see her, right? I
Sure.
love talking to her when I can. Growing up, we had a fraught relationship on occasion, right? I bucked against authority. I was a very recalcitrant child. I'm still a little recalcitrant today, okay? That hasn't gone away completely, but I have toned down.
I think there something has changed over the years where recalcitrance knows the word recalcitrant. The fact that bad boys used to use words like that, what's happened? What's happened to our civil disobedience? They don't have the same vocab that they used to. Wick was under the bridge reading Shakespeare and, also stealing cargo from I can only imagine you. Were you a highwayman, Wick? How old are you?
A highwayman, a bandit, roustabout, a ne'er-do-well, if you will.
Yeah, that's the N word they were tossing at you back in the day. Anyway, Wick, thank you for having me on. I'm excited. We're going to talk about something that I've experienced on a couple of different levels, but it's basically all rooted in this core question of why do people not heal? Why do people go into these often described as temporary spaces, recovery spaces, spaces of change and mutual aid, and they stagnate? I mean, we saw that one Twitter that happened recently, that person who they had a therapist, I believe they were talking with their therapist. They were a leftist. They were a red, emoji in the bio, in the name type. And they had a therapist who disclosed to them that they were Israeli and asked them if that was an issue. And they were implying that this person was racist for even broaching the question, even bringing it up. Many people chewed them out, perhaps fittingly, on Twitter for basically saying, like, listen, that's a totally normal question for boundaries, asking whether or not you can actually invest trust. But the other thing which a lot of people asked, why are you talking about the Israel-Palestine conflict in therapy? Why is that a boundary towards your personal growth? And I think that this connection between politics and personal is, like, proudly espoused on the left. Many people say, the age-old adage, almost a trope at this point, of the personal is the political is the personal. But it's, like, really not as universal as you would think. You don't have as many people. I don't think that there are, like, well, one, there aren't right-wing women in droves in therapy, but if there were, they wouldn't be talking about, oh my God, I'm just so sad because people are getting abortions all over the place. They seem to compartmentalize these things a
I
little
get what
bit.
you're saying. I've seen it, the transition, if you will, to people's lives being more public and the public being more part of people's lives. It's this kind of push and pull that happens, that because we have access to so much about so many, everything seems like a battlefield. There's no place where we can rest, it feels like. There's no place where we can set down our swords for some, and I think that that has been to our detriment as a species, as a culture. And as you mentioned, because I saw that tweet, I saw other tweets like it. This wasn't the only one of its kind, but this idea that the cause is causing you distress isn't
Yes.
new, right? It's not new, but it is poignant in a way that it wasn't before social media. I have a feeling that in most of these discussions, as they go, social media is going to be at the root of a lot of it, but there are other things to discuss surrounding this and regarding it. It's not the sole problem, and I'm eager to hear where you take this and where you go with this. Sorry for interrupting, but
No, you're
continue,
good. Yeah,
please.
no, I want to, decompress some of this. So, the first thing I want to put forth is that if you're going to understand why the left is uniquely subject to these effects, I think that you need to understand how the left defines its social spaces and how it defines what it would call praxis. Now, I've got a little thing here that we can use to put this together. So, spaces. Leftist spaces are not just places that you exist in. They could be places you merely exist in, but that's not the only way that people engage with them. When somebody is engaging in a leftist space, they are not just thinking of it as a social means or a political means, but mutually, both of them simultaneously. And usually, whenever those things are in conflict, everything has to defer to the political, which means that whatever is personal needs to frame itself as political. So there's a supremacy of the political above the social because naturally the leftist believes that people, at least in the imperial core, have a debt, a social debt. They need to be they are justified in living a social life only insofar as it is like affecting change or at least not creating a negative. So if you are a man, you need to be anti-sexist. If you're white, you need to be anti-racist. But that's not merely a belief system. It is also expressed in your social life, and it's expressed in the way that you go about your, day-to-day engagement with the people inside of that space.
For the audience, can you give us some common examples of leftist spaces? Like when you say leftist spaces, right? What exactly do you mean? Do you
There's
like
so
when
many of them,
I
but
think of a leftist space?
I'll
Just
give
real
a couple
quick.
examples.
Oh,
So
please.
in digital space, they're extremely abundant. Almost all of Twitch could be considered a leftist space, although it'd be a de facto leftist space because on the internet, it has become the standard moral ethic because it is in line with the terms of service to essentially espouse the values of leftism, base leftism, not the most extreme hidden elements of leftism, parts like, violent revolution, but things such as, pretty agreeable concepts, anti-racism, anti-sexism, yada, yada, inclusion, DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. This is the perfect overlap between the corporate world and leftist values. Now, that would be your de facto leftist space. There would be places that are more explicitly leftist. You're going to get into digital communities of people that consider themselves to be leftist. You're going to get your 𝕵𝖎𝖎s, you're going to get your 𝕬𝖎hs. To a certain extent, you're going to get your destinies at certain periods of time, although these spaces tend to be a little bit looser on the way that you demonstrate socially. There is a line you can cross. There is a line you can cross. And everything kind of exists on a spectrum of how much it feels in debt to those principles. In real life, there are a lot of places that are organized around. So, places I've been before. I used to be a part of a program called Food Not Bombs. Food Not Bombs is a very explicitly leftist space. People are cooking food made out of scraps, things that are about to go spoil. So they take spoilage from restaurants, they cook it, they usually make it vegan. This is one of these instances of comorbidity of values. They usually make vegan food that they then give out for free at local parks to homeless people and basically anybody that wants food, anybody that needs food. Their idea is that the way that we will improve the world is through Food Not Bombs. Another example, Books for Prisoners is a common project. There are different names for it, but what people will do is they'll come together and they'll take a bunch of spare books, they'll package them and send them to prisoners so they have something to preoccupy themselves with.
Talk about charities, basically.
They're kind of charities, but this is the part that's
NGOs,
different.
Kind of.
They are usually not official. They usually don't have some kind of organization, a name attached to them. A lot of these spaces, because they are leftist in character and they don't want the oversight and they don't want to be rotted out from the inside, taken away from their value, they stay small, they stay self-organized. You'll usually see flyers on the side of a bar or something like that inviting you to go to these spaces. Sometimes they'll meet up at like an anarchist bookstore that is a business, but the organization is technically separate. So these spaces, they start off with the ethic or the imposed political ethic. But just like any place that people continually exist inside of, they become social if they weren't social in their intent to begin with. People start hanging out with one another in and outside of that space. They get to know one another. They date each other. They do all kinds of things together. And what happens over time is that what was once political becomes socio-political. And then what social existence exists of the lives of the people involved in these spaces is necessarily affected by that political.
Interesting. So I have a few thoughts.
Go ahead.
I don't disagree with anything you said. I think it was very well said. I think you kind of hit it on the nose, but I think you're being a little too specific. I would go broader than that. When I think of a leftist space, for example, these are all good examples, but it has become, at least nowadays, almost any space in which there becomes enough leftists, right, or enough people who have this kind of idea. And it's not just leftists, but we're talking about leftists today. The right does this to an extent. But this is it's a problem because it's infiltrated spaces that were not intended to be this. So you have institutions, colleges, workplaces in many cases, right? That, again, were set up initially not intending to have this. NPR talks about this. There was a recent report released by NPR, the progressive, what was it? It was who was it by? I have it up here. 𝕾𝖍𝖎𝖙𝖘𝖍𝖔𝖜, a veteran at the Public Radio Institution, says the network lost its way when it started telling listeners how to think. This was released on April 9th, so just a couple days ago, yesterday, in fact. And he talks about how him having been at NPR for 25 years, how it started as one thing, but became a quote-unquote leftist space. And I think that this is happening more and more and more often. That's why I'm interested to talk about it today. That's why I wanted to discuss this with you today, is because everything is morphing into this kind of socio-political kind of blob of there is no place to just not be political anymore. There's just not.
Let me pose a theory on why certain spaces go down this direction, why this development happens in certain places, and whether, because let's take the different theories. Let's address the elephant in the room, which one of the main things people would say is this an intentional invasion of spaces by people that are leftist in order to co-opt them? Are we going JQ with this, but it's LQ? Are we going leftist question? Are leftists explicitly going around? Now, in the case of unionization, that is an explicit effort, but that happens inside of businesses amongst people usually that work in those places. That is not really an invasion. That is an expression of your economic virtue values in a place where it matters. Some obviously some organizations try and go into businesses they don't work into. That's not what I'm going to address here. One of my main thoughts on why leftism spreads inside of spaces on the social and which ones it does is that these are what I would describe as spaces of need. Spaces of need, these are places that have a certain type of scarcity. There's a scarcity about, say, a social scarcity. There is a economic scarcity. There is a scarcity of attention. This is why places like the academy, this is why places such as a community that expresses itself around mental health. This is why a place in which, well, really all of social media, because social media creates artificial scarcity, because the timeline, the amount of time we have to engage with these things, the amount of energy we have, and the fact that we engage socially not through who is in our surround, but instead who connected on the entire global grid we are most interested in hearing from. This creates a scarcity, and this creates spaces of need where people don't have their needs met. And they're going to these spaces in order to fulfill those needs. A very common thing that you'll see in leftist spaces is you'll have a sort of like general chat, and then you'll also have like a safe space style chat. And safe spaces in general are very popular with the left for this reason, because most people come to leftism from a place of need, not from a place of abundance. This is why you're Jesus Christ, I'm fucking shit on my lip.
I don't know if I agree with that. In fact, some of the more stalwart identity leaders among the left are, frankly, elite, privileged, rich. They have an abundance in a very real way.
They have an abundance.
Yes.
They have an abundance, but their orbit does not. And their orbit is attracted to them by the fact that they have it. One of the most interesting things that you can say is that Hassan's community is both socialist in character, but also following an extremely rich person who could theoretically spend more of his money on various projects. Instead, he's buying a house, he's doing this. I'm not going to make those critiques because I don't know enough about it. I don't care enough about it. Sure. But it is a fact that people who say eat the rich suddenly love a rich man. They love seeing a man become rich. Now, is it about if you're a CEO or that or the other? That aside, people are attracted to abundance. People with scarcity are attracted to abundance. They want to figure out what the traits of people who have abundance are so that they can be abundant with energy, attention, money, so on. This is the point of orbit. Orbit happens because the body becomes so celestially massive that smaller bodies become attracted because they are able to gain the momentum by relation.
But one of the reasons that influencers, not just Hassan, but other influencers, are able to be abundant is because their orbit feeds them, right? That's the business model. They are fed by their orbit, right? They are fed by the whales, if you will, in the thing. And for better or worse, progressive leftist kind of ideology has very, very deep pockets. These are, again, one of the quickest ways to get really, really rich is by going down these ideological rabbit holes. Not just the left, the right does it. Look at the Daily Wire and all these other massively funded organizations, but the left has it on a more disorganized, individualistic kind of way. How
much do you make from Progressive Victory? Do you feel comfortable sharing?
It's not a huge amount. I'm not going to give you a specific figure, but it's not. I can't quit my day job.
It's supplemental. That's the point.
Yeah.
There are instances where it's like really, really high, and obviously there is a perverse incentive that is related to how much you are being offered. And this is kind of what I'm talking about. I do think that people enter these places from scarcity, even though the scarcity is not necessarily intensive. Like, if you know that there's somebody out there with a lot of money that will offer you that money, if you can become an effective spokesperson for them, that you can become an intermediary between them, the out of touch, financially wealthy, and the in touch, financially scant public. You can very easily become rich. You can become the Tim Pool of the left if you wanted, but it's not just the left. Now, this is what I want to talk about with spaces of need. And I'm not just talking about the money, but I want to talk about this idea of social justice and the left's duty to be corrective or ameliorative, corrective. The whole point is to balance the scale.
Okay, so yeah, social justice warriors, I think, is the common vernacular. Their duty to correct, to right wrongs, to fix things.
Inequalities, yeah. So you can't merely be a nice person in the left. You need to be a nice person focused on being nice to the people who are not treated nicely. And sometimes when I say nicely, I don't just mean, like, hey, how you doing, Wick? I mean, listen, I'm not going to listen to a white man talk to me about XYZ. We have centered those discussions enough inside of the primary sector of the populace, inside of the mainstream media, yada, yada. So we must be a rebalancing effort. We are going to uplift Black voices, brown voices, women voices, cripple voices, any other type of voice other than what you could say is the amalgamation of all majority identities. In this instance, you can see this idea people have many times right now with the Israel-Palestine conflict, where a lot of creators who have like a lot of influence are being asked to speak on Palestine because people believe that Palestine and the Palestinian perspective on the conflict is not being represented properly by the media. So the alternative media is asked and held to account, quote unquote, to be the rebalancers of that scale. Does that make sense?
It does. I'm waiting for you to connect how this is a phenomenon that is uniquely left. Alternative media and influencers, they fill a void. And I think this is ideologically neutral in a way. Sure. If there is enough people who want to hear a perspective, there will be people who will rise who will give them that perspective. It's a search for it's a market that needs filling. And I think that this, with Israel-Palestine, with any major conflict, with any major controversy even, there will be a segment who wants to hear the other side, so to speak, or the counterculture, if you will. And I think that this will happen no matter what. Like, look at the vaccines, right? We had a huge amount of scientists come out saying the vaccines are safe, that vaccines are effective, etc. But there was this market for people who were skeptical, and people rose to fill that need. So a lot of people will blame vaccine skepticism on misinformation. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think a large part of the misinformation came out because people were skeptical and they were looking for something to fill their to make them feel like they are right, like they're correct. And yeah, I don't know if this is I'm waiting for you to connect the dots where this is uniquely left, please.
So the first thing that makes this uncharacteristic, or it might not just be, it's not that it's unique to the left nearly as much as it has a unique result because of the nature of what the left is. The left is countercultural. The left is ignoring the mass media. The left is usually quite young, usually quite involved in these subcultures. The subculture is their culture. They don't watch Fox News, CNN, et cetera, et cetera. They're not getting these mass voices. So the idea that the mass media has a unique influence over the populations that occupy these small communities, I don't think is a correct assumption. I would say instead that if you exist inside of one of these spaces, it is very easy for your popular, echo chamber, as people would call it, to actually have no majority voices. So you aren't actually rebalancing at a certain point. What you're doing is you're creating something that is an alcove of separation from the other thing. You're not getting an alternative voice. What you're instead getting is only the alternative voice, not what it's responding to, not what it's trying to rebalance from. This is the thing about like the internet now. This is the thing about how much agency we have over our media. You don't turn on the TV and hear Ben Carson. You turn on the TV, you say, let's flip to YouTube and find, oh, Thought Slime. Oh, I know this guy or girl. I'm going to go from that person to this next person, this next breadtuber, this next breadtuber, this next breadtuber. And I have learned over the next 16 hours that there are two bad things. There are men and there's capitalism. And that becomes like a universal narrative that then makes it so that you can't actually say that you know very much on that outside perspective because you're not watching. I mean, you might watch a PragerU video being reacted to. That's the closest you get to like genuine dialogue. And usually that's not a debate. Those debates happen through the less left. There's a certain depth that you get into where
The
it is
less left? Can you
only
elaborate on that? The less left. What do you mean?
Liberals are like a sort of like less left portion. You are considered more of a leftist.
Center left, if you will.
Center left, you could call it that. But what I would say is that the left has this concept of cognitive purity. You can hear it inside of the language that gets used. Usually when a person describes the opinions, if you're a leftist and you describe the opinions of people on the other side, it's very often that you say, I don't even understand how you could believe that. I don't even know why they think that. How could a person... You act as if it's beyond your capacity to imagine. You don't engage with curiosity. You engage instead with this idea that it's unthinkable, not because you're not smart, not because you're not able to do critical thought, but because you need to communicate that the thought patterns behind that belief system are so estranged from you that you're pure of them. I can't even imagine being racist. I can't even imagine liking men more than women. It's a hard stance that says, I am ethically untouched, morally untouched by that cognitive process.
So
to understand it is to be closer to it. So to be ignorant of how it functions is actually a noble thing.
So one of the things I've noticed when I got into Twitch, right, initially, 2 years ago at this point, I think it was 2 years ago at this point, maybe 3. It's actually coming up on 3, I think. The thing I noticed wasn't this, I can't imagine it, right? What I noticed is they would say things like, oh, conservatives and people who vote for Trump, they have less IQ than left-leaning people. There are studies that show that they are stupid, right? And it's this idea of it's almost like this race realism, but for ideology. It's almost like this predestination, but for ideology, right?
Well, the most long-lasting one, which we're getting onto, is which is the idea of disgust. When you look into the psychological profile of people on the right, the two things that they say is that, one, they are more sensitive to disgust. They can become disgusted in a way that the left, for some reason, people who are more left voting and policy supporting, they don't get that disgusted in comparison. And the other thing is the fear element, the idea that they have a larger amygdala, I believe, is the neuro argument, the neurobiological argument, which is that when they feel fear, it is more likely to take over and overpower the cognitive center of the brain, the prefrontal. And yeah, it is weirdly eugenicist.
Yeah,
except it's the shape of the things on the inside of the brain, not the outside.
And it's one of those things where, like, I also noticed that I think you mentioned this or alluded to this earlier, that a lot of the people who were on the left did not actually know what the right felt and believed and thought. They had ideas, right? They're like, well, the right is racist and they want to kill you. I hear that all the time. I heard that all the time. I still hear it. The right wants you dead, right? The right wants to kill you. They're coming for you, and they're going to take away everything you need. All those things that you rely on, they're going to strip them away because they hate you, because you're lesser to them, because they don't want you around anymore. They want to use you and destroy you and eat you up. I heard that constantly. And as someone who has people who are very right-wing in my life, I knew that wasn't true. Like, I've actually, like, hung around, talked with them. They've been parts of my family, and I don't have daddy or mommy issues, right? Like, I don't hate my parents or hate my family. And so I don't have that baggage that I'm bringing into this. And while I vehemently disagree with their political views, they're not coming at it from a place of evil or stupidity. They're coming at it from say one more time?
No. You finish your sentence, and then I've got a statement after.
They're coming at it from a place of just looking at the situation from a different perspective. They often will want similar things that the left does. Human flourishing. They want people to succeed. They want people to be healthy, wealthy, wise, etc. They just have very different ways of trying to get those results. Ones which I think don't work, but they do think work. And so that's, again, something I've seen over and over and over again when I talk to people online, when I talk to people in real life. And that's where I am coming from. But go ahead, please.
Yeah, and to just frame that in context, looking at the way that the left talks about the right, the way that the right talks about the left, hating blacks or hating the family as a core virtue is very rare. People aren't just racist for no reason. They tend to be racist as a secondary feature to something that is a core value. They tend to be anti-family, and you implied it right there. We talk about this idea of mommy issues, daddy issues. Oh, they hate this, they hate that. And that gets talked about a lot with things like trans issues or gay issues, because there is this idea of the supplanting of the natural order, the reproductive center, this idea of heterosexuality and reproductive heterosexuality as the norm, that the right feels a strong debt to. For religious reasons, sometimes for nationalist reasons, but for one reason or the other, they believe we got to keep the birth rate up. We can't just let the human race go extinct. The left doesn't want the human race to go extinct. They might care less about the human race going extinct, but that's not their active plan. But then every once in a while, in a reactionary flurry, in order to be edgy, in order to say something that is meant to like sow division or like freak out the other side, people will make statements of base virtue, saying like, we need to destroy the family. This is like one of the most caustic things that happens on the left. This idea that you can say the point of politics is to destroy the family. My goal is to break up patriarchy and the role of the father inside of the family. And it's like, I love being bombastic. I get it. Real fun. But that's the same like self-defeating rhetoric that you're looking at when somebody on the right says something equally fucked. Whether you're looking at like the Klan or something.
Yeah, in either of these cases, I think it's a matter of stated goals versus actual goals, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of people, not everyone, obviously. We're talking generally, we're not talking specific. Yeah. In general, in these groups, in any extremist group, and I consider a lot of the left extremists and a lot of the right extremists, right? What they'll do is they'll say something so extreme that it will ostracize them forever from outside of that space. And that's said on purpose as a way to signal that I am with the team, ride or die, bitches, okay? We are going for broke. I am going to make it impossible for myself to ever get back into the mainstream. We are going for broke, and I'm going to say the wildest stuff I can to signal to my in-group that I am with them, right? It's a lot of reasons why gang members, right? Gangs will do this too, right? Where they'll go and they'll have you commit some horrible crime in order to ensure that, hey, now we're the only ones who will take you. Now we know you're loyal. I think that happens a lot and again, with the Ku Klux Klan, with a lot of these leftist spaces will do this too. They'll say wild stuff, and it's for that purpose. That is why
I'm making a double entendre with the thing I'm doing on screen here. On one level, I'm saying preach, Wick, preach. You're right. I've seen that too. But I'm also saying this is what people want to be. They want to be the preacher of the ideology. They want to be the true believer, the zealot, the one at the podium, the one who doesn't get to leave the church, the one that is like absolutely at the center of this space of need. And this is one of the main perverse incentives. Now, I'm gonna do a departure in order to temporary departure in order to explain my theory on this, and I'm gonna do it using my experience previously working in the recovery community. So if you don't know, I used to work in addiction recovery service. I was mostly just an accountability agent, although I did a lot of counseling because
careful with your credentials, because if you say them at least any way wrong, there are people who will find you and they will
Here are
make
my credentials.
Content about you.
Here are my credentials. I worked in homeless outreach for a little bit. There's a lot of drug addiction happening there. There's a lot of direct aid that you're happening there. And it turns out that, as you'll figure out through the entirety of this story, it is almost impossible for these nonprofit structures to stay alive without having people who are passionate about the cause, because there isn't enough money due to, in some cases, not enough funding. In other cases, greedy upper executives of these quote unquote nonprofits. There's not enough money to actually pay people and retain workers unless they are people that are willing to make economic sacrifices in order to keep this project afloat. So I was working at first for $11 an hour in 2019, mind you, $11 an hour in 2019. And then after a raise, $12 an hour. That's a raise after a year and a half. Wow, buddy, really good money. The people that I was working with, the people that were in the program, are working at Taco Bell because, you know, they're felons. They have to work at a bad job, but they're making $16, $17 an hour. They're making more money than I am. And that's just the way that this thing is staying afloat. It's operating off of the passion of a couple of people that care more about the principle than the thing. And I stayed with it for probably about 2.5, maybe 3 years before I basically quiet quit for a while and then left, because it's not possible to put all of yourself into something that's not putting anything back. Now, what was my experience with this? What did I learn? Now I'm gonna have to pull up Windows Paint really quick eventually, but until then, I'm gonna try and describe this using text. Hopefully, we can keep it simple to this. So this is what happens: drugs, you're doing them, you get caught, arrest, you go to jail, you get let out on a conditional agreement.
These are the people you worked with, not you, to be clear.
Not me. No.
Okay. I thought you were telling us like I did drugs and I got arrested, then I went to jail. Okay, fair enough. Go ahead.
No. This is the life of a person going through the clinical process.
Sure.
So you do some drugs, you get arrested, you go to jail, you're released on a conditional agreement. You usually are going first to rehab, and then you are going to a transitional. Now, a transitional will usually be a residential that you live with other people that are in recovery, and then you have accountability agents, whether or not that's your counselor or people like me that are essentially the technicians of the process. Eventually, out of that transitional, you get into your second stage, and then eventually you become essentially just a guy that goes once a month to a place to pee in a cup. That's all your accountability is, until your conditional is elapsed. It's pretty simple. And this would be check-in. So This is what happens, and this is what they explicitly describe. This is your narrative. This is what you're doing. What they don't really talk about is what is happening inside of the cities and towns where these programs are happening. Because I'm not going to talk about the place that I was, but I'll just go ahead and say really quickly, what are the 3 main industries in the town, the college town that I used to work in? And this is not the 3 main industries that
Liquor
always
stores?
existed. What'd you say?
Liquor stores?
No, although there's a decent number of that. No, I'm talking about the main money that gets made, the main exports. So the 3 biggest industries are rehabilitation. This is a fun one. Medical manufacturing. And then this is an even sillier one. What do you call it? Manual labor, which is true everywhere, but in any developing place. So there's a lot of development happening. In the place where I worked, there were 4 medical manufacturing companies. The only ones in the state were all central to that one area. And why is it? Because nobody wants to work there other than felons. They offer them approximately $15 an hour to work with hazardous chemicals that eat up their skin, total isolation for 40 hours a week. Not very good pay, but it is an official job, and they are working inside of this machine. Same thing with manual labor, long hours. And there's also one other thing, which is the service economy, but we'll get into that in a second.
So, and just to keep us kind of on track, just for the audience, because you're asking what are we talking about? And Brittany Simon, thank you for the raid.
Hey!
You are going to relate this to how I'm curious. Maybe give us a little spoiler. How does this relate to what we're talking about when it comes to therapy and the left?
Yeah. So the way that this relates is that spaces of need sustain themselves off of the debt that those who were rescued by these spaces of need feel towards the programs themselves.
So it's kind of like a self-perpetuating kind of thing, yes?
And I want to tell you really quick, I'm trying to get into this really quick. So this is an industry. This entire thing is one cyclical industry. Why do these manufacturing plants exist here? Why are there so many rehab centers? Why is manual labor here, even though development is not happening necessarily in that town? It is happening throughout the state, and then they are being shipped out to these places and then coming back. Why is it all central in one place? It's because there is a surplus of really cheap, really desperate felon labor. The service economy operates on the same thing. You go to the kitchen of a Denny's, you're going to hear the clicking of an ankle bracelet. This is just what it's like. These economies don't make enough money to sustain off of voluntary labor. Nobody's working except in places where you have to work or else you go back to jail. Their conditional agreement requires that they have a full-time job, that they stay in the program, they stay clean, and most of the programs, mine included, require that if you don't have a full-time job, you go to AA meetings 2 hours a day, 7 days a week. So there's an extreme incentive for you to become an economic unit. We're trying to habilitate you back into the mainstream economy.
Is this unique to your place, or is this just a general thing? Because you're talking about your experience.
True of every recovery alcove, and there's several recovery alcoves. Okay. That's why I feel like I don't have to pick out one in particular.
Fair enough. This is there's a pattern of these across.
Yes.
I'm assuming North America.
Yes.
Okay.
And one of the main reasons, I mean, everybody knows about for-profit prisons. There are other situations like this, but this is what you would call like an open air for-profit prison or something. The whole point going on here, I know I'm making the puns. The whole point going on here is that everybody here is working because they need to for their own freedom. They need to so that they can not go back to jail. And this is happening in places, Indiana. It's happening in a lot of, oh God, what do they call that again? Appalachia It's places where there is a lot of drug use, where there is a lot of meth, there is a lot of heroin, there's a lot of basically everything's fentanyl at this point. I don't feel like you have to say fentanyl. You say the word drug, it means fentanyl. Outside of like maybe weed, there are people that the only thing that's keeping them alive is the fact that they are inside of this. So it's not that you're just scared of going back to jail. You're scared of not dying, or you're scared of dying to the drug that you're addicted
Fair
to.
enough.
But anyway, so let's go back to the leftist thing. Why do most people go to leftist spaces? It's because they have something they want. They want to belong to a group that shares their values. Their values are scant. They're rare. They're not necessarily in person. Maybe you live out in a red state. Maybe you live out in the country. You live far away from those places. So the digital spaces matter a lot. You then either go to those digital spaces or you move to somewhere like New York, LA, the Bay, so on and so forth. Portland, Oregon, classic example. You become involved in these leftist spaces. You eventually find out that they are not just social, not just political, but always both. And that people who have a social, personal need will frame their need as a political situation in order to elevate their personal need over the needs of others.
Can you give us an example of that?
Yeah. Classic one would be somebody who is saying that we need to have women's only shows, or we need to make it so that bands with white men are not being booked as much, and we need to center the voices of Black women more, or we need to have more queer spaces. These don't sound bad at first, but the whole point then becomes that participation in the social is predicated on the idea that your identity is affixed in the hierarchy in relation inverse to the narrative about the primary hierarchy. If you are white, you are at the top by default, and nothing can remove you from the top other than existing inside of a community that puts you at the bottom. Male, cis, heterosexual, etc. I'm not even trying to complain about this. This is normal. If it weren't for the fact that these things, on their inclusivity, on their mutagenicness, on their endless looping of need, don't actually fulfill people permanently. What happens instead is that everybody feels like they are at a scarcity of attention, a scarcity of expression, a scarcity of psychological support, up until the point that they then start taking advantage, of this structure, of the narrative in this structure, in order to move themselves into a place of getting their needs met. So you're going to have people that, let's get controversial on them. We're going to have people that are identifying themselves as not being straight, even though they almost exclusively date straight. People that identify as not cis, even though they're not transitioning, and they don't dress in a way that is subverts the gender binary, at least not necessarily. We have people who are going to push forward the idea that other people need to be silent in order for them to talk because they are of a minority group, not in the group itself, but in the world en masse.
One of the I promise this relates, just give me a moment, right? One of the things that I've noticed, and this happens a lot in academia, is you'll have people, and it seems like every few months there's a new scandal about this, where someone will be someone who's published papers, who's been a thought leader, who's gotten a position of power in one of these organizations. It turns out that they were faking their indigenousness, or they weren't really Black, right? Or they weren't really X, Y, or Z, that they had written as an indigenous person, but it turns out there's some white lady from San Francisco. I wonder if one of the reasons that is happening, right, is for this same dynamic that you're talking about. That in order to get a personal need met, that they have taken on the identities that they think would make it more likely for them to be heard. The alternate explanation, and one that I'm actually leaning more towards, is that they are doing this for the reason that it gives more weight to what they really do believe that they have to say. So in order to fix or to be an important voice for indigenous people who are struggling, they feel like they can't say anything as a white person, and so they have to adopt a persona of indigenousness. I think this is
Yeah.
harmful because, again, I don't think the color of your skin should have any fucking anything to do with the truth of your message. And I think that for me is one of the most frustrating things about that brand of identitarianism, right, on the left, is that unless you are of a certain background, you are not given the time of day. And I think that that's led down some very, very dark paths, and it's created these situations where you have academics, right? People who are smart, people who have successful careers. They're adopting the mantle of the oppressed in order to speak for them because they feel that they just can't do it just as themselves. It's odd.
And
Anyway.
to be a mouthpiece of Harvard or of any of the big Ivy schools, or even to be a published writer in a newspaper, is about as close as you can get to having a privileged voice. I don't know how many people are saying, "Hey, hand me the New York Times real quick. Give me a switchblade. I'm going to cut all the black articles off. I'm not interested in that." They're not sorting by author. Most people will check the author only if they really like the piece and want to find more of their stuff. You can see their name. Many people won't even think necessarily of the ethnicity. Most of these articles actually include the name of the person writing it at the end when you're at the website. A lot of the time, there is a little blurb at the bottom, but they're not necessarily saying it at the top. Or if it's at the top, it's ignorable. I don't think that people, and this is what I'm saying, I don't believe that it's corrective.
True, though? Because I see this all the time. Some articles that just were published today. There was a man who published, I'm not sure if it's a man actually. They say, "I'm Jewish." It's in the tagline and it's in the headline. "I'm Jewish. I covered wars, and I can see what's a war crime and not." They'll do this all the time. Like, "I've been at NPR for this amount of time, so this." The headlines lead with their identity. That's how the headline leads.
You're missing what I'm saying. I'm not trying to say that people don't use that and they don't project it. People, of course, do that. They leverage their identity in order to have authority. Everybody needs to state what their authority case is whenever you're reading something and you want to explain it. At least if it's not implied. If it's not implied, I'm saying that most readers are not going out of their way looking for Jewish voices, looking for black voices when they open up a newspaper. They are going, and then when they see the topic and they see how the topic relates to the identity, that might lend more credence to the perspective, but they're not saying, it's not as common, at least not in my experience, for people to be like, other than with the small example of going to a channel that is designed around and explicitly advertises itself. We are not going to our media, your standard person, looking for specific perspectives. The argument around alternative is the idea that the mainstream media is full of the perspectives of people that are not of this diverse background. One, I think that has changed. Two, I think that the identities that are at the top are not the ones that people recognize as being at the top. I think that they're mostly class-based. You're not looking at, a bunch of white opinions. You're definitely looking at a lot of middle-class opinions, educated opinions. And, not to hate that, but I mean like mainstream educated, like they've gone through those channels. You're not necessarily rebalancing. Now, if I wanted to make a space that was rebalancing, I'm making the world's lowest IQ magazine. I'm getting people that are not informed. And this is why Breitbart's killing it. I'm sorry. Memes aside, like the whole point on this rebalancing effort is that people on the left and the right both do it, but the left does it in a way that leaves room for a sort of social, linguistic trickery from time to time where a person can give themselves an edge. And you're noticing people giving themselves an edge. I don't even think that it's always conscious. I think that very often it is unconscious. People are putting their pronouns in the bio. They are explaining what their identity is in the bio on Twitter, not because they're like, listen, I need people to know I'm part of this like minority class. They're doing it, a lot of people that are not in those minority classes, because it has become the norm. It has become the price of entry.
Expected. And look, maybe we're missing each other, right? Maybe we're missing each other. Maybe you're saying something and I'm just not catching it. But you said, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you said that people don't look for these things. They don't look for the identity of the author and these kinds of things. I don't think that's true. As someone who puts out shows all the time, one of the things I get asked almost every show that I have about trans issues or about black issues or about any issue that centers around an identity, whether it be men or women, one of the things that people will invariably ask is like, do you have trans voices on this panel? Do you have black voices on this panel? Do you have these types of voices on this panel? So I think that identity is something that they look for just from the jump.
That is true in leftist spaces because they see themselves as a corrective opposition to the mainstream media. But I'm saying that I think that your majority person, your average mainstream person, is not going out of their way to find white perspectives, or that I don't think that white perspectives are going out of their way to find them. I'm saying that this idea that we are creating a corrective apparatus, I don't believe it's true. Now, in instances where we're talking about a panel about what it's like to be trans, I'm not putting Will in his channel and 4 Mr. Girl followers on it unless they've already taken the pink pill, as they all will. What I'm instead doing is I'm looking for people who have hopefully a mainstream trans experience and who are able to have a productive conversation with one another. But that's because that is the topic of the question. In social spaces that are left in character, it's not merely we are having a panel about transness, we need trans voices. It is instead, we are talking, we are spending time exchanging social patterns of exchange that have nothing to do with creating a panel or something creative. And we are still saying, please, can you not speak over black voices in the community? Can you please not speak over, even if it's not about the topic of blackness? There is a implicit social hierarchy of preference for the voices of some people, which is meant to be corrective, but I think that it's correcting something from the past, not something from the present.
I don't disagree with that. I don't disagree that in a lot of cases, we are still dealing with the reverberations of things that happened long ago, like a stone dropped in a pond, but we can still feel the ripples, even though the stone ain't fallen anymore. The stone sunk to the bottom, but you still have the ripple effects going out that we can still feel, that we can still see, and we want to stop that by dropping more stones in it, but it just perpetuates the problem. I don't disagree with that. I think I want to...
Can I check our point of difference?
Say one
Do
more
you
time?
agree, though, that this supposed narrative of correction is being sustained not because the people genuinely all believe that that is the mainstream exterior, but instead because it creates a ladder. It creates an opportunity for many people that if they rhetorically lean into, they are able to walk up, they are able to get more needs met. And thus we have a bunch of people that are in social competition with one another who are playing little games where they are saying, actually, I need to be the one centered right now.
It's absolutely both. You have people who are true believers, who absolutely do believe this, especially, I hate to say this, especially the cis white male participants of such systems. They will debase themselves and purposely, because a lot of them are true believers, right? Though even though it does give a social capital in and of itself to do that, right? You do get coinage in these
sometimes
places.
Sometimes you're just desperate for the right?
I guess. But
there is something to that as well, where it is just, if I'm going to get laid as a man who is insecure about himself, the best way I can do that is to insecurity max. The best way I can do that is to nice guy max.
But to your point, though, yes, there are a lot of, not a lot, but there is a segment of people who will do this, again, because it works. Because why wouldn't they? It's a power play in a very real way. It's a power play. There was a story about, was this? It wasn't Columbus University. Starts with a C. I forget the name of the university. Columbia. Maybe it was Columbia. I'm not sure. But this is a few years ago. So back during the height of the racial awakening we were having back in 2020, etc. There was it was a law school, and in this law school, they had a test where the test was, in the example, it was about a hate crime. And they had the N-word in the test, in the text of the test, but they aspergated it, which means it N asterisk, 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 asterisk.
Sure.
One of the people, the students in that class, one of the black students, threw a fit, claimed that he felt unsafe, and basically leveraged that to get his professor put on a temporary leave of absence. This was later reversed. They later reversed course, but there was like a month where this professor, had to deal with that. So when we talk about power plays, that's happening all the time, right? It's another avenue in which people have discovered that they can exercise power over others by leveraging these identities that they have in order to attack. $5 or €5, I should say, from 𝕵𝖎𝖎𝖙𝖘𝖍𝖔𝖜. But those voices don't matter unless they had the most radical opinion. Otherwise, they are just a traitor to their minority group.
Partially true, definitely. And that's one of the ways, there are multiple axes of ascent inside of these spaces. Obviously, one is being the absolute true believer, as we've discussed. Another great way to move up in the ranks, as it were, is to be the only person of some novel identity. So you might be the only black person, but are you the only trans black person? You might be in a trans space, but are you the only person who is transitioning? Just to put it on the other end of the spectrum, you're the only person who's going about the surgery or something. People are constantly gaming for the reason that they should be the prime authority, the reason that they should be at the top of the hierarchy.
Yeah, but how is this different from right-wing spaces? Because I've seen, like, I was raised in a religion where much of the same things happened, but they had a different flavor, of course. Instead of identity, it was who can be the most pious, holier than thou, right? That was a huge thing growing up. Like, oh, you don't caffeine. Let's use this as an example, okay? In the Mormon religion, I grew up Mormon. The rule is don't drink coffee and tea. That's the rule, okay? But one of the unwritten rules, because it's not actual rule, right? There's no actual rule against it. You can't drink caffeine, right? Caffeine was illegal, so to speak. And so a lot of people will say, yeah, I know that it's written that you shouldn't drink coffee, but I don't want to avoid even the appearance of evil, so I'm going to not drink caffeine. And it's this one-upmanship to like be the authority, be the holier than thou. This is why I equate a lot of kind of this brand of leftism to religious thinking, because it is.
Yeah.
It's a very religious way of thinking, a religious way of going around the world. I guess that's the best way to put it. Sorry, I'm
it is an
orthodoxy.
Go ahead. It is an orthodoxy, and it's also an orthodoxy which privileges being the strongest adherent. Sure. So in that way, it's not just about religiosity of the thing. It is also about like how devout are you?
Devout.
How extreme are you? Of course. I'm not trying to say that it's extremely different. I'm saying that where Christianity in general is pretty open about what it's about its tenets. It says on the tin, you're going to hell, this is the way out. Or in some other ones, you're going to be left behind, here's how to get lifted up. Like, there are different questions going on, and they are very, very explicit. It is not so often that you're going to go into a space that is social, but then it turns out almost everybody there espouses a leftist rhetorical hierarchy, expresses this is what I'm talking about when I say the DEI thing. The terms of service on almost every website are the way that they are because if they aren't held the way that they are, people inside of the business, people that own advertising, will appeal to this new mass morality that has replaced Christianity, but has all of the sort of secular aesthetics, but all of the religious fervor nonetheless. So when you go into, say, a space that claims itself to be about, oh God, give me a random property, media property that isn't necessarily political.
Gaming,
sure.
video games, yeah.
Let's go into a video game community. Let's say that you start watching a bunch of video game YouTubers. Turns out a lot of them are leftist and trans. What's the reason behind it? It's hard to say. Maybe it's that people who grew up playing video games were more insular. They're expressing themselves through YouTube now. There are all kinds of different reasons that you could argue for, but it turns out that the more and more that you get into these insular hobbies, the people that make content a lot of time, whether or not it's because they are the curd that rises from the whey, or if it's because they just happen to be the most devout creators, they end up determining what the rhetorical standards of that area are. You can't be a right-wing video game maker, not for long. Not for long. What's his name? I don't like the quartering. I don't really like right-wing content creators to begin with, but I specifically know that the quartering is the type of person that if he was a leftist and espoused the same zealotry about his opinions, but from a left-wing perspective, he wouldn't be banned from Magic the Gathering tournaments. He might be lauded. He might become a professional grinder. We have multiple people that have said equally extreme things as him and have done similar levels of harassment.
Yeah, but
it just happens to be that because he has a ideology which is contrary with corporate culture, where leftism is somehow synchronicitous with corporate culture.
Yes and no. I think that there are people, look, when we talk about creators such as Quartering and others, a lot of their brand, we're going to get into a lot of different topics here because what audience capture is a big one. Okay. Sure. Audience capture is a big one
for sure.
Going and fulfilling a desire. A lot of what the Quartering and other grognards and these kinds of the chuds do, right, is there is a group of people who doesn't want leftism in their content, right? They don't like it. And so they'll look for people who explicitly either aren't that or are anti that. And I think that smart creators who aren't that or are willing to pretend not to be that or pretend not to believe that, at least, like, again, you have true believers, you have grifters and everything. They latch onto that, they emphasize that, and they can't be anything other than that. It takes a lot to get out of that because their audience is all built on that. And so this happens a lot both in left and the right spaces. You become beholden to your audience in a real way. You can't change because if you do, you'll lose your audience. And your audience is how you get your money. Your audience is how you get your social currency. Your audience is your fame. That's why you're there. It's for the audience. And it traps you in a real way. It traps you. But I don't think this is unique to the left or the right. I think this is just something that exists.
Sure, I'm not claiming otherwise, but you do recognize that there is a difference of the relationship between the left and corporate culture and other ideologies of corporate culture. There is something about, and when I say the left, I really should split into two different, because there are two pathologies inside of the left that are completely divorceable. There is the DEI friendly, and then there is the DEI unfriendly. On the left, there are things that you could say that are diversity, equity, inclusion. We need to uplift certain voices. We need to prioritize certain creators. And then there's the other stuff, which is that if I could, I would put that man's head inside of a guillotine. I would throw a pipe bomb through the window of yada, yada, yada. Those are the kinds of things that they can't say explicitly, but many of them believe. And frankly, I think a majority of the people that say it also don't believe. They would never actionably do, but it allows you to ascend inside of the most extreme faction.
To your groups. Yeah.
Yeah. But in the incidents, in the situation of audience capture on the left doesn't put you at conflict with corporate culture. Not usually. You can if you become part of the extreme left, but even the mainstream right, your audience capture as a Second Amendment, protect the family, yada, 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 will put you more at odds with corporate culture than left will.
This is true except for in certain issues. There are certain more leftist issues that will get you fired, right? Palestine, Israel is a big one. If you happen to be extremely pro-Palestine in certain spaces, corporate-wise, it's just no-go. You'll get fired. We have examples of this, right?
Sure. And that's a novel formation, to be clear, because I would say that is the slipping of that second category into the first. The things that are implicit to the left but don't usually become explicit are being risen to the surface because a larger section of the left is being held to account by the more extreme faction of it. So this is what remember I said, there are people that are hounding content creators to talk about Palestine and be pro-Palestine, and a lot of them are keeping quiet. A lot of them are staying out of it. And you could say that, oh, they're scared of the Jews that they work for and they're booking agents and all that. That's the kind of thing that people say. But it's also just like, I don't know if you know what the life of a celebrity is, but they are basically dogs. They are poodles on leashes going from place to place. They are so busy. They don't they understand what the fuck is going on in the world because they are workhorses of usually fashion brands, usually the shows that they're working on. So the idea that Taylor Swift has an educated opinion on Palestine is comical. The idea that but keep in mind, there are enough people in the celebrity status that are Jewish and care about Israel that they feel as if they need a competitor to that, right? You have your, oh God, what's the fat comedian everybody hates? The blonde lady.
You're going to have to be way more specific. That comedian everyone
blonde,
hates is a
white
broad
lady
topic.
Everybody's mad at for being pro-Israel.
Look, I don't know.
Amy Schumer. Amy Schumer was one of the ones that's being clowned on for it the most. I'm thinking if you look at a chat, it just finally summoned to my brain. And then obviously we have Malik, the Big Bang Theory Jeopardy hostess. That
Timothy Chalamet. He's been considered a Zionist and boycotted. There's a few.
Yeah, Mayim Bialik. How do you spell her name? Mayim.
I don't know.
Bialik. Yeah. I mean, it's just one of those things where because these people exist on one side, everybody has to then push for the other, and it's like, I don't think that their pro-Israel stances are very informed. I don't think that the pro-Palestinian opinions, on the other hand, would be informed either, because these people, they just don't have free time. They're not real people. They're like half people. Half of their life has been sold to the machine. Escaping from that, the whole point, we are talking about audience capture. There's more than just audience capture. There's also business capture. There are like so many incentives on every rung of these people's lives that to have them be the vessels by which words are spoken out is insane. They don't, but anyway, there is something about that which is novel. I'll agree. Palestine is a unique topic where even if you're a mainstream left voice, you're just being hounded by a lot of really loud people because the word genocide is being used, whether or not the person who agrees with that does or not.
Yeah,
they have PR people.
Let's reconnect.
Yeah, you feel free to dilate. Bring it back.
let's bring. I think we're going all over the place. I want us to kind of get back on course and to
Okay.
answer kind of the basic question of the show, right? And of our
Yes.
discussion, right?
Yes.
Is how does therapy, how does society, and how does the left interact in such a way that creates a, if not unique, a unique tasting kind of situation, which makes it hard for people to interact and exist in a genuine way, right?
Okay.
Does that
Yeah.
make
Let's
sense? I don't
land
know
the
if
ship.
I just used a lot of word salad. Does that make sense?
We've been out to float for a while. How about I say it this way? What percentage of people do you think after catechism, or is it catechism, the separation from their faith, find themselves in therapy? It's a very intense number.
Catechism isn't separation. You mean
Not
excommunication?
catechism. I forget the word.
Excommunication?
Excommunication, whatever. You leave the church. You
Sure.
lose your faith. How many of those people end up going to therapy for that specific thing? Very large number.
Okay.
There is something about these types of spaces that creates mental health issues. And it doesn't just make mental health issues for the people who are existing in the space on the low end, it creates it all the way up. This is what I'm talking about in this. When I worked in recovery, the people that were in the program went through the program pretty well. But some of them were not able to get footing into primary society. Some of them became counselors for addiction recovery programs themselves. They took in my role. They went into the industry itself because they feel beholden. So they are getting paid dirt shit money. They are working forever with something that is a reminder of their trauma. They are constantly inundated with the misery of others. What does that do to a person's psychology? When you're a leftist and you exist inside of a space that you entered because you had needs, you might have gotten them met, you might not have gotten them met, but then the only way for you to stand to repay that debt, if you do get through, is to become a facilitator of that space and to be a person who is essentially leached off of energy-wise, time-wise, by people who you don't even know whether or not they are actually operating on pure incentive or perverse incentive. What does that do to a person's psychology? Why is it that when you find a Twitter thread full of leftists asking, hey, leftists that believe that there will one day be a violent revolution, why don't you own a gun? They all seem to say, because I would shoot myself with it. It's not a good place to be. It's not healthy for your brain. It's rotting your ability to believe in like the future and that there's a life worth living out there. The only thing they literally described life as a perpetual struggle. And why? Because they feel in debt to something that saved them. Jesus Christ, except this time it's leftism.
So let's see. I have a couple thoughts on that, but I want to read a couple super chats first, if we may.
Go for it, please.
$5 from 𝕍𝖎𝖙 to say, on the topics of men's health, mental health, for Tuna Chip. How much are you bidding on the 𝕵𝖎𝖙 companion doll? More or less than a used car?
I don't know enough about it. Is it like literally being waged off? Let me check.
I have no idea.
Again?
The guy paid my $5 to ask you.
What doll?
The 𝕵𝖙𝖙. I don't.
Companion
that one
doll?
person. The person.
Yeah. I know that's the Owego face or whatever.
Yeah.
Let's see. Silicone lovers. 100% real life manga and animal love dolls. 𝕵𝖙. Are you going to get the 𝕵𝖙 doll? This is at r/sexdolls Reddit community. Let's see what people are saying. I didn't know about this. I'm going to tell you one thing. Holy shit, people, 16,000, or not 16,000, sorry, 1,660, and that's on sale. And let me just say, don't Google it, Chad. It looks disgusting. I'm not gonna get it. I would never get a sex doll. I personally don't believe in supporting the sex industry at all. Very against it. So
fair enough.
You know what I would do? I would buy it just to get another one off the streets, and then I'd burn it. Keep
There
going.
you go. Look, the old-fashioned book burning, but for sex dolls. I love it. 5
Absolutely. Pussy burning.
euros from 𝕵𝖎𝖎98. The case about Palestine here is leftist-style DEI applied to anti-Semitism, bumping up against leftist policy aims. I would not call it right-wing. Thank you for 5 euros. I will, to your point, though, of why it seems to be, at least online, that there are a large portion of leftists who are miserable, quite frankly, right? I think that a lot of it comes from the signaling that we talked about earlier.
Sure.
You aren't allowed to, if you are doing well, your position in the hierarchy goes down, right? Or goes up, which causes your position in the leftist hierarchy to go down.
You become a facilitator of exchange. Yeah, you have to be the person who, like, you have the
you have to
each
be,
to
you
their
have
ability,
to suffer
from each to to each according to their need, from each according to their ability.
Yeah. You have
to represent ability is to be in debt.
In certain circles, you have to suffer. If you are not suffering, you are not, your voice isn't going to be, you are from a place of privilege. And so your voice does not matter to them as much, right? Suffering is baked into the structure of this ideology.
Yes.
Again, is not all leftism. I want to make it clear. It's this identitarianism that exists in certain leftist circles, right? Identitarianism, which is a problem. You must suffer or you will not have any currency within the space. And I think that this is a problem that it's a twofold thing, because you'll have people who will just say that they're suffering more than they are, but this feeds into this perception that the people who consume leftist content have of the world. You see the world as a constant struggle, as a constant oppressive dark force. And look, if you are doom scrolling like that all day, right? If that's your main source of social interaction and of information, yes, it's going to have negative mental health effects on you. You're going to see everything as a struggle because everyone around you seems to be fucking dying and suffering and having the worst possible lives that they could possibly have. It's trauma everywhere you look, and that's going to create your own little special brand of trauma hell. So yes,
there's another element here that makes it unique for the left, which is that your suffering and trauma is not just yours. Your suffering and trauma is a resource that exists inside of the social economy to be leveraged by others when something happens to them. Let's say you were raped.
Rephrase that, please.
I'm getting an example. Let's say you were raped. You are a woman who got, assaulted maybe by your father or something. Your rape is not just your rape. Not in this frame. There are certain frames where we can say individually you were harmed. But there's also this question in a feminist space, certain feminist spaces, where you'd say the woman's role politically is that they are the one who gets raped. They are the one upon which the institution enables and protects the rapists of. They are the victims of patriarchy. Patriarchy is a rape culture. That would be a classic one. Similarly, you would have something where if somebody bullied you, whether or not it is explicitly or is implicitly, or maybe if it even was at all intended to be of relation to something like your sexuality, your gender expression, your race. If you are a person that has that past experience and somebody else has that, they won't even frame it as them being bullied or them being harmed on that basis. They will say, I was the victim of a racist microaggression, a racist macroaggression. Everything is related to one continuum, one pattern upon which the suffering of all others I want to finish this, is a lingering mana-like resource that you reach out into and use as leverage for recompensation. You say, at blank, is the one that called me a boop. And then you've got thousands of people who have pain in their heart from being racistly aggressed in their replies, telling them to rope. It's important that you have essentially Huns. Everybody gets to take a little moment being Attila and say, there's China, cross the wall.
I think that this isn't a... So here's a problem I have with this. This is, I think, an artifact especially of social media, that everyone is seen as the exemplar, as the archetype, as the... Because I see this happen all the time when you have allegations come out of sexual misconduct or things like that. You have people on both sides who will sit there and judge the performance, for lack of a better term, of the person telling their story, and will say things like, you're making the rest of us look bad, right? You're making it harder for the rest of us. You have this happen with men, right? You have this happen with every group, on the right, the left, the center, everywhere.
I think men are simps. Is it COON? Is that the term that black people use?
Yeah, that's it. There's a few, right? And
race traitor in general.
Exactly.
Let me say the one you're allowed to say.
Yeah, race traitor, or you're a traitor, a sex traitor, right? A gender traitor, right? Yep. Again, this isn't a left thing. This is a group thing, and we have tribalized to such an extent that we are now all, especially interacting in any public setting, whether it be online or off, if you're in any public setting. And to go back to what we talked about much earlier, every setting's public setting nowadays, and it is becoming more and more public in a lot of ways. There is no private setting anymore, right? And because you're in a public setting always, you were always seen as an example of whatever tribe that you were representing, or even if you don't intend to represent a tribe, you will be, the enemies of whatever tribe they think you are will say that you're that.
Yeah.
This happens all the time, and this crosses all party lines. This crosses all identity lines, but it is all, again, based on identitarianism.
It's a weird one constantly. Too. It's a weird one too, because I will agree, this is not new. A lot of people, I've tried explaining to like a more Zoomer contingent that while words that now are seen as hateful and directed towards a minority class were more popular in social discourse, like the Xbox thing, the N-word, I think, was pretty explicitly always racist. But ones like the R slur, the mentally disabled,
retarded,
and the F slur, homosexual, they weren't usually pointed at people of that identity. They were usually pointed at people that were not of that identity, because it was a way of saying, you're not a blank, thus you have no excuse acting this way. You are not fulfilling the role of a man. You're not fulfilling the role of a triple-digit IQ individual. And it's a form of social placing. When I call you a boop, F bloop, I'm saying, stop acting that way because you're straight. Because you're straight, you shouldn't act that way. It's interestingly enough a form of social control for straight people, and men in general. It's one of the main reasons that I think that whenever like you get a lot of like quote unquote bisexual women saying they want to reclaim the word, I'm like, you weren't bullied with that word. You were bullied with the D word, maybe. The DY, the kind that's hanging out on your tires. But it's a weird thing for them to use that reclamation language. And this is what happens: the collapse of the individual into the identity, into the identifier, into something that means. And I personally don't think that it's unique to the left, but I do think that the left is attached to the idea that everybody needs to be part of a collective struggle. You need to feel the misery of others. You need to feel the misery of people that are not in your identity group if they are in a more minor identity group. You get a lot of people. What was the people that are whipping themselves?
Flagellant?
The white people, families. Do you remember this?
Families? I know people whip themselves a flagellant, right? They
whip self for racism.
Self-flagellate Flagellate?
Yeah,
Flagellate?
flagellate. But
Yeah.
there's a famous instance of like of this going on. In another instance, we have you'll see a lot of people in public squares crying, getting very, very emotional, not about their own experience, although that is why they're crying, but through they're using somebody else's trauma, somebody else's misery as an outlet for their own terrible feelings, because as a person inside of the higher echelon, you're not allowed to talk about, process your trauma unless you're doing it through virtue of supporting somebody else, taking seriously somebody else's more severe analog to your trauma.
There is something that I think plays into this and drives this, and I think that it is especially on the left, right? It's this, it's the Omni-struggle, okay?
Yes.
How, and we see this with everything, is like, ain't no one free unless everyone's free is a big thing. Like this shared kind of Omni-struggle. And I think it's done us a disservice in a lot of ways, because we can't talk about X, because you can't just talk about one issue. You have to talk about all the issues, because they're all interconnected. They're all related. You can't solve one unless you solve them all. And we've created this this Gordian knot for ourselves to make it impossible to untangle anything or solve any individual issue, because everything's so connected and tied up that we've made it almost impossible to do anything. You see this with the Palestine stuff again, as using this as an example. You'll say, like, the Palestinian issue is a feminism issue, right? Or it's about black people too, right? It's about all these other things, all these other struggles, the LGBT
settler,
struggle,
colonial, white supremacist,
it's
yada,
all
yada, yada.
one struggle. And so you have this kind of like, anytime anything happens, no matter what it is, it's always part of your personal struggle, because all struggle is this Omni-struggle, this all-encompassing struggle. So the things that are happening in China to the Uyghurs, they are actually happening to you too, because you're a feminist and you suffer from things that are related to feminism, right? Like it's a real problem, and it's a problem policy-wise. It's a problem personal. It's a problem legislatively. It's become just this issue. $2 from Testicle Johnson to say, please watch your microaggressions. I'll watch them and I'll do them anyway. We're going to do some macroaggressions today, baby. Nothing micro about what we're going to do, right? But yeah, we really need to start siloing and segmenting these things.
Yeah, for sure. And can I say,
please.
It's not just siloing and segmenting, because that might be one of the main issues, is that these spaces become all spaces. And I'm not saying they become like every space becomes these spaces. I'm saying they become omni spaces. They become the entirety of your life. They need to cover the social. They need to cover the political. I think that the wrapping up of these. What'd you say?
I said, yeah, like, again, to a callback to earlier in the discussion, every space is becoming quote unquote leftist space, because it's not about the space, it's about the people who dwell in it. And as, again, any space you're in becomes this space, or whether you try to consciously make that or not, right? You tend to make everywhere this kind of struggle session space, if you will. I don't know how to put it, right?
No, I agree. And that is the point, that leftism is not necessarily even about Karl Marx. It's not about 𝕾𝖍𝖎𝖙𝖘𝖍𝖔𝖜. It's not about Emma Goldman. You would see a lot of people describing the books, which would be called communist or anarchist, and they would say, oh, you really should read theory. No one's reading theory. Oh, I can't read. I'm too busy. I work 3 jobs and I have 5 partners. Why do you have 5 partners? Well, I'm trying to like just deconstruct the family. And it's like, what it is it's leftism is the thing that you lean on that justifies the personal, because the personal is only justified in accordance with the political. And that's what's wrong about these omni spaces. That's what's wrong with this ethic.
To be clear, this happens in religious circles as well. Like, again, one of the main issues I'm having with this conversation is I'm seeing I'm seeing throwbacks to religious upbringing, right? Like all this has happened before in church communities across the nation, right? All this has happened before. It will happen again, right? Like you see this amongst the
Okay.
ultra right conservative wing. Everything is religious. Every political issue is a
I
religious
want to
issue,
be.
right? This is Christian
I want to
nationalism thing.
figure out what you're expecting, because it seems like what you're expecting is that the thing I'm pointing out needs to be unique from all things ever always. But what I'm trying to say, and this is important, is that it is less explicit when you go into a space that has this leftist ideology inside of it. This is becoming the norm of all spaces of which don't have politics as their primary identifier. It is becoming the every ideology. It is liberalism, obviously, but it is a very specific type of liberalism, a specific type of social language that is purveying everything, and creates games where people are in competition with one another. It maintains scarcity. It leverages the scarcity of others, and more importantly, it does not conflict with the spaces that it's inside of. If I were to make a Mormon cult on Discord, it would not last long before people from the opposing gang, the people of new
Well, look,
new
this happened
new
to the
Leftonia,
look,
to
this
come
happened to the
over and
Mormons
report
back in
me.
the day too. They didn't leave America um voluntarily. They were killed until they left. But yeah, I see what you're saying. I do get it. I will agree with you that the left tries to pretend it's above it in a lot of ways.
Yes.
They say, "Well, we're
And
not
it
like
pretends
those
that it
spaces. We're
I
different." And they're not.
I don't believe that these people actually believe the orthodoxy. And that's the thing. They say that they do. They say more people identify as true believers or perform true belief by far than any other contingent. There is something in terms of like the social identities. Obviously, religiosity matches that fervor. There is something about this, which is like, uh, there's so many like little things they'll say. Hope this helped. Um, it's not my job to educate you. A bunch of stipulations for what people should be prioritized in terms of language. There's this obstinacy towards change. There is this call it 69 theses or whatever. You can call it whatever you want. There are tenets which are unquestionable, even though they were erected to theoretically question the unquestionable tenets of something else. Well, I got news for you. Protestantism, as soon as it rejects the Catholic Church, eventually becomes the primary form in America, eventually needs to be reformed in its own right. Well, the left needs to be reformed. If it's a reform of the social culture of the West, and that's what it wants to be, I think that it has reformed itself into a place of mutagenic growth, cancerous, strange, new priorities, which have nothing to do with the virtues in which it claims to believe in. That's the point. That's the point. Versus, the Catholic Church is what the Catholic Church has always claimed itself to be. The supremacy of the papal authority above and as a primary vessel for the word of God. The same thing is true, very, very much so, of your Fox News, your Breitbarts. This is a Western chauvinist. This is one thing or the other.
I don't disagree. I just think that we're overplaying our hand just a tad on this. I don't disagree that the left pretends not to be these things, but it very much is these things in a lot of ways, right? I wonder if we're being too broad stroked when we say the left, because I don't think this applies to all the left. I don't think
that it applies to the left. I think that it applies to those people that occupy spaces and which are good at seizing control of spaces, because this is what the language does. The language creates a natural, you could argue not natural, but it creates a new hierarchy, a hierarchy that everybody kind of is okay with. I think that for a lot of people, if you had 50 people starving in a boat, with 25 people's worth of food to make them throughout the entire trip, and there were 25 bullets and a revolver, how many people would stop playing the game of Russian roulette early? With each person that dies, there is a lower statistical probability that it will be you. And to begin with, the whole thing is, if it doesn't happen to you, we're all dying. That is the idea. There's not enough to go around. There's not enough to go around. The primary means of meeting people's needs have failed. The government is not getting food and shelter and everything to everybody. We need PayPals to be shared in this Discord. We need to be, if you are not giving $25 to somebody's PayPal in this Discord and you kind of provide receipts of it once a month, I'm sorry, but as a white person, you're leaving the space. Like, that's the kind of insanity that you're going to see inside of a lot of these spaces, these mutual aid spaces, as they describe themselves.
I have I've never seen a space like that, but I haven't been in the bowels, right? So fair enough. Fair enough.
I'm glad that you haven't been in the bowels. I will tell you that, because you would not do well.
I'm too normal. It's true.
You look very digestible.
I pass easy through the system. That is true.
I don't know about that. I think you'd be soluble. I don't think you make it out in the same shape.
Maybe not. Let's get some final thoughts on this, and then you want to take some calls for a little bit?
Yeah, we can call. I'd love to talk to people. I'd love to talk to people.
Because there's some people who have some issues with what you're saying. There's some people who are agreeing with what you're saying. Gang, after we get some closing thoughts here, if you want to talk to us about this, if you have issues with what we've said, or if you agree or disagree, or you just want to talk for a few minutes, join the Discord. Jump backstage. We'll pull you in, and we'll talk to you one at a time. We'll have a small conversation. How's that, gang? We'll do some call-ins. It's been a while since we've done some after-show call-ins, so we'll set aside some time to do that. Give us your closing thoughts on this, and then I'll give mine. How's that? Give us your closing thoughts on your presentation today, and then I'll give mine on my issues. But go ahead.
Sure. Yeah. Oh my God. 𝕾𝖎𝖙 sent me the 𝕵𝖎𝖙 thing in the DM. My closing thoughts. My closing thought is that I think that this, to land the ship entirely, this is the primary issue with a lot of spaces of need, which is that they mix things that shouldn't be mixed. Therapy, some pedagogies are very, very explicit about not mixing the personal and the clinical. You will avoid projection. You will avoid creating too intimate of a relation. A lot of people, when they go to therapy, they get essentially a connection that they don't want to leave behind. So then they continue paying their therapist, whether or not through their insurance or otherwise. If you're inside of a social space that you feel beholden to, you're going to go in, you're going to get what you need out of it or not. Let's say that you do, though. You're then going to feel like you owe something to it, and you're going to stay in it. So what it turns out is that nobody leaves the belly. Everybody either becomes a clinician or a client in perpetuity. If you are a person that is an addict, if you are a person that is going into politics, but doesn't really know how to get into party politics, so you just want to figure out how you could figure this out, and then you, in attempting to do this, have to work with a bunch of people and their particular social neuroses, for better or not, you are going to be caught in a maw of conflicting interests, and you're going to be surrounded by people that are going to game the individual social architecture of that thing, either for political gain, personal gain, or otherwise. It's a major problem with these mixed spaces. And I think pretty much every social space should be separate from politics. Every politics space should be separate. You should create unique domains and have very explicit rules in those domains, because that is what keeps these things healthy. This is what makes it so that there aren't little secret perverse incentives to pull things apart. That's my idea.
Tuna Chip, thank you for being here. Where can people find you if they want to find you?
I'm here on Twitch, twitch.tv/TunaChip. I'm going to be streaming after this. I'm going to be playing some Balatro.
Don't worry.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm just also letting people know that, Well, if you're about to be rated to me, there's a little button you can press that makes you follow me. If you got any money, obviously, I'd like the support.
We're gonna
But
take
you can do
we're
what
gonna
you
take
will.
a couple calls before we rate.
Yep,
But
take the calls.
and I'm gonna
We're
give
that's
a
maybe
I'm
at
gonna
least an hour in the future.
yeah
So
I'm gonna give a my own kind of thoughts on this,
I get
right?
it.
Because again, the topic's very broad that we wanted to talk about today. Very, very broad. We touched on a lot. We could go on for another 2 hours actually and get into the nitty gritty and have our and quibble over the details and in many cases. But overall, I agree with the thrust of your messaging here that there is a problem with people who have swallowed their politics whole, and it's now this part of them that is inseparable. We need to be able to separate these things. We need to be able to exist outside of these things. And now people will make every excuse in the book why they can't. But you always need to set aside time for yourself to be you, and not just to be a leftist, or not just to be a conservative, or not just to be white, cis, black, trans, whatever, right?
Yeah.
You need to have something separate from all of that so you can set it down. Otherwise, it's a heavy burden. There are people out there who will, as you said, game the system. Vampires in the castle. You can't leave it because they will suck you dry, right? If you try, they'll suck you dry if you stay. They will drain you. And you need to be able to protect yourself, protect your energy, protect who you are. And I think that we as individuals, right, should be willing to talk openly about these things and be willing to have more discussions. Anyone who's telling you that you can't ask that or you shouldn't be talking about that is not your friend. They're your enemy, in fact. You don't have to, right, be an expert in a topic to talk about that topic. You don't have to have lived experience in a topic to talk about that topic. People will be able to judge, right, whether or not they want to listen to what you say or they value what you say on their own. But you simply being able to express yourself and express your opinion is something that you should feel okay with doing. It's okay to have an opinion. It's okay to be wrong about your opinion too, in fact. But we have this culture where it's always demanding repentance, but it never gives you forgiveness. It's always demanding that you atone, but it never gives you absolution. You are always expected to apologize, but you are never expected to be forgiven. And it's created this situation where it's unsustainable. It's perverse. It's wrong, and we need to fix it. That's my final thoughts on this. Gang, I'm talking a lot because I want you to get backstage and I want you to talk to us, okay?
Get in here.
We
Come
have
on.
another we're going to go for 10, 20 minutes here, right? Talk to us. Exclamation point Discord and chat. Click the button, accept the rules, jump backstage, let us pull you in, talk to us for a few minutes. Come on, we're not scary. We're not vampires. Okay, we won't bite you. Okay, we got a caller here.
Okay, sounds good.
Hello, you're live.
Hello, hello.
Hi.
Hello, hello. Good evening.
Good evening. What you
How you
got
doing?
for us?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a couple more points about this. Wait, I'll silence the chat.
Go ahead. The floor is
Yeah, have a
yours.
go.
Thank you. I think that there's another major problem that's also different between the left and the right, in which the left kind of has a problem of demonizing success. So it's not just about demanding a lot, it's also about tearing down people who actually achieve something and looking at everything as like a total struggle, that if you can't win every part of the war, there's no real point in actually achieving anything if you don't achieve like total victory, right? So it's this like total
Boom or
war.
bust kind of deal. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of been growing a lot as people have become more and more extreme. It's not just that their opinions become more extreme, but they're not really willing to settle for anything but a total victory in their little position. And even if they achieve something really, really big, like a really big victory, they always like kind of move the goalpost so that they can continue to strive and struggle because they've actually made struggling a bigger part than actually achieving success.
So, a couple things. I think that this relates back to the Omni-struggle, which we talked about earlier, right? Is the reason a lot of them aren't willing to accept a compromise is because it would be throwing their other issues under the bus. So if they had a legislative bill, right, that was meant to solve homelessness, for example, because that bill didn't also address the inequities between racial lines, it would be thrown out as not enough because, again, you can't just solve one problem. You have to solve the problem, right? And it becomes a self-defeating. You are disincentivized from compromising because that is seen as perpetuating the problem, right? And not actually solving anything. So that's one thing. The second thing I would say is that I don't know about the struggle thing. I agree with you in that a lot of people on the left will, again, pretend to struggle a lot more than they do, but I don't know if it's a feature of the ideology. I could be wrong. What do you think, Tuneship? Go ahead.
I don't even think that it's necessarily that they're pretending. I think that the most logical explanation, the thing that makes the most sense to me, is that struggle is a fact, but they're wrong about what is causing it. So when they put efforts to try and fix their problems, they are given false information about what the problem actually is. Sometimes they are taking multiple sources of pain and explaining them through one avenue of pain. So the classic one that I was describing is that you are actually miserable because you're exposing yourself to constant retriggering. You are like going to a place where you're supporting people that have experiences that you once had, and you would like to think that you are doing something noble. But, you know, how would you feel if your therapist cried every time that you talked to her? You'd feel pretty bad. It doesn't actually help anybody. Nobody gets proper care. Nobody's actually getting the type of support that they want. Instead, everybody is kind of splitting the balance and creating a scarce environment. Those who do actively game the system on purpose, those are like very, very malicious, evil people, but I think that they're rare. Like, I don't think there are that many psychopaths in these spaces. I think there are a lot of heat seekers. That would be the easiest way to put it. People that don't even realize what they're doing. They're simply following the natural.
They're responding to the rules of the
game.
game. The incentive structure leads them to behave in certain ways. That leads to the thing. Anything else from us, friend, before we let you go? Anything else?
No, just to respond to that last point, I think that they are rare, but they also have like all the tools to game the system, so they get like more coverage than the like majority of people, right? Like it's easy for them to climb because the system is so exploitable.
Oh, of course.
Yeah. All right.
Hard not to agree with that when we see that people who there's a classic psychopath test as people call it, but I don't even care about the results of that. It's just one of those things where we notice that people in authority tend to be the ones that are unwavering. They are able to use rhetoric, and that applies inside and outside of this paradigm. The boss of my job, I won't talk too much shit, but it's just like everybody constantly says that guy probably should have been a cop. Why is he doing it in this small fish, big fish, small pond? Sometimes.
Thank you for being here, friend, and we'll let you go.
Yeah. Good night.
What a nice gentleman. This, before we bring on the next caller, this reminds me of something. Something XNV said in chat, actually. He called me a 𝕍𝖎, a vampire exclusionary tribalistic humanist, but it reminded me of something that I think we should have touched on, which we didn't. It's the self-isolation that happens on the left, and I'll talk about this very briefly. So one of the side effects, the artifacts of this oppressed, oppressor, hierarchical, identitarian kind of way of looking at the world is you have to have ways to separate people, right? You always have to be able to identify who is the oppressed and who is the oppressor. And so we have developed these more and more and more granular definitions of how to identify ourselves. And one of the results of that is you become, I don't want to say unique, but you become this very, very specific set of variables that makes you distinguishes you from all those around you. And it makes you feel like you're isolated in a very real way. You're isolated. You have become this thing that doesn't share a lot with others because you were now this thing. So an ideology that is, superficially based on collectivism has ironically made everything very isolationist, and it's a problem. But I just want to touch on that. Let's bring in the next guy.
Yeah, bring him in.
Hello, you're here.
Infallible Fowl.
Nice beard, by the way. You're muted on your end.
Yeah.
And Code Matter, thank you for the gift sub. Oh, and thank Wolf of Mandalore for the gift sub. Thank you, guys.
I don't know what's going on
Continue
with
giving
this.
me gift subs, but continue, please.
Hey, Fowl, go ahead and talk real quick.
Oh, 1 second. For some reason, it's playing through the speakers.
Okay, well, while he fixes that, thank you. We're on a hype train on Twitch. Yeah, can you mute the stream? Okay. Yeah, we're on a hype train, so give me money, gang. Super chats help. Okay, Infallible Fowl, hit us with something.
Fowl, can you hear us?
Okay, tell you what, we're gonna send you backstage to mess with your audio issues, and then hopefully you can get that done.
In a moment.
And yeah, we'll give you a moment. Okay.
Check your properties. Check your properties in Discord itself. Settings, properties. You got it.
Okay. Hopefully he can get that fixed. In the meantime, hello, you're live.
Hello.
Hey, buddy. Hi. How you been?
Good. Give me 1 second. Sorry. Okay.
The karaoke crew has reunited. How are you doing?
Hell yeah. What's up, brother?
What is up? Is my camera working or no?
Your camera's working. You're on. We can see you. What you got for us?
Oh, okay. Sorry. All right. So you've been talking about. Unfortunately, I didn't get to hear everything. That's kind of annoying. I'm gonna go back and listen. But
totally fine.
It sounds like the main ideas that we're talking about: leftism, the problems of leftism, problems of trying to identify why leftism is so focused on big picture versus small picture. Is that kind of the idea?
No, arguably, actually, what I'm saying is that leftist social spaces have a commingling of the social and the personal, which states that it prioritizes the big picture, but actually uses the aesthetics of big pictureness to ascend low picture things to the top. So the social disguises itself as the political in order to gain advantage.
Okay. In order to, okay, it's like the moral high ground, and therefore you have to subjugate everyone to this same level playing field. Kind of, is that what you're saying?
It's not even necessarily a level playing field. One of the main instances I'm talking about is that spaces will claim that they are about recovery from some social debt or some particular issue, and feminism might be assault racism in a Black community, economic inequality in a leftist community. And all of these things have a common language about it, which I would call the new pervasive DEI adjacent left corporate speak. And all of this stuff is being used to turn these arguably political spaces into social hierarchies where people use the political to gain social leverage on one another.
Right. Okay.
To the
I gotcha.
detriment
So
of
you're,
politics.
right, and so you're talking more about groups that you've been a part of. Then, because I'm guessing you've had this kind of experience.
Yep.
Then.
In
Or if you-
person, digital.
Yeah.
I've seen it many times. Yeah.
Right. Okay. It sucks that I caught the tail end of where you were talking about.
Okay.
Well, sorry, but it's
This is
the tail end about like.
To do a quick callback, Wick, this is who I have as a reporter on my new uninformed media crew. The person who comes in and their news article is them asking the reader to tell them what their article is about.
It's like the guy it's like the guy you're watching a movie with, and every 2 seconds he turns to you like, "Hey, what did that guy just say?" Or "What's going on right now?" And you're like, "Okay."
Right.
No, it's fine, buddy.
We're just
watching
doxing
and you
But
said
it is
you
because-
needed callers.
Okay, I appreciate you.
I love it. I'm just saying, because you're calling from a phone, it kind of and because you're out in public, it kind of feels like you're our feet on the street reporter, but you don't know what the conversation is. So you're like, what the hell are they talking about?
This is like one of those whose line is it anyway skits where you have to figure out like what you're supposed to be reporting on. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
And we got to give you the clues.
Okay, I can tell you there was a very clear example of this happening. And actually it was at that event with Socrates. We were coming back, Ubering back from the hotel, and I asked the Uber driver, this is something I wanted to talk to Socrates about anyway. And, we were all drunk. Coming back with Uber driver, I asked the Uber driver, is she going to vote? And she just went on a huge tirade saying, no, we can't vote. Voting doesn't matter. Had coronavirus stuff, all this stuff. We were there for 2 hours, okay, going back and forth. And Socrates, the entire time, because she was a Black proud woman, he looked at me like I was being a racist fucking asshole by pushing back on her lived experiences. I'm not joking. At the end of it, that's exactly how it felt like. The next morning, Socrates said, I needed to have a come to Jesus moment. And all I could think was, what in the fuck are you going to tell me to come to Jesus for? Because at the end of that conversation, she said,
how dare this you tell me to come to Jesus?
So, 2 things.
Yeah.
2 things. One, I haven't heard this story before, but this is
I haven't talked about it, yeah.
I would love to sit down with you and talk to Socrates because I want to hear his side of
I would love to. Yes, me too.
Because
I want to see
from how you're presenting it, you did nothing wrong. But of course you're presenting it that way. So I'm curious. Like, did you also call her a slur or something? What happened, right?
No, I don't even have that. It's so sad that I never had any slow words or shit like that in my vocabulary ever. I just never have that shit because I honestly, truly believe, because I'm a fat kid, that I don't think making fun of someone's bodily, personality, or not even the personality, making fun of their those traits that you can't change. What's the fucking point? What's the point? They're fat today. They can change. I understand that, but why make fun of them for that? Doesn't matter. There's a Black person.
Because it's funny and it makes me feel good. Okay.
Well,
I got a question.
Sorry, buddy, but like our call has a weight limit, and I think you've exceeded it.
I have a question before you go.
Okay, what's he got? Okay.
I have one. Hey, I have one question before you go.
What's up?
How much did you tip her?
I gave her 5 stars, and I actually gave her. I never tip Uber. And I tipped her because she took the time. She gave up her time to have that conversation. I appreciated that. I'm not a tipper. I think tipping culture is fucking retarded. Have lived everywhere in the world except in the States and only in the Americas. I hate tipping. I only tip if I'm forced to tip, as in like I'm at a bar. That's something I have to do. I understand that, but I'm not going to tip I don't tip Uber drivers. No, I'm sorry. I don't do that.
The liberal Orthodox Church appreciates your tithing. Thank you for your service. Thank you for paying.
I have a panel on tipping culture, Dwick. I will fucking.
I will definitely. I think whatever you think about tipping and its things, you tip. If the waiter doesn't totally screw it up, you give them some money because that's how they make their money. Anyway, see you later, buddy.
See you, bud.
Okay.
Tipping culture is crazy. I will say one thing about it later, but tipping culture, the discourse around that, you're gonna have your Mr. Pink. You're gonna have your entire like, what's the scene? What's the scene in the? You don't tip? I don't believe in it. It's gonna be straight from the films. Anyway, do we have a properly working mic foul?
Well, the mic was working fine, but I don't know why. When I was watching the stream, I could hear it on my headphones, and now that it switched me over to the call, it's going through there again.
But you can hear us, okay?
You can hear us.
We can hear you. What do you got for us, sir?
Okay, a couple things. I just I want to say it seemed a little bit sinister to when you're going over the what was it? I should have taken notes here. The way the right
Sinister?
pretends to be holding up victims. The way the left pretends to be holding up victims. I don't think it's completely just that. I think it's that they actually genuinely do care about it, but it's been kind of just framed like we want people to be victims so we can use them. I think that's a weird way to frame things.
I think there's a certain type of person who does. Absolutely. I don't think it's a majority, but there are a certain type of people who want to be victims and want to have someone that look, if you make your money on advocating for a cause, if that cause gets fixed, you lose your source of income. There are incentives at play here, right? Now, that is some people, right, take it as seasonal, and they understand that they are looking to put themselves out of a job, right? But there's other people whose whole thing is finding a problem or if they can't find it, creating a problem in order to monetize it, right? You agree these people exist?
There probably isn't I guess the creator world in a sense.
Well, in journalists, right? There's a lot, right? Like there's a lot of different professions which are incentivized for there to be problems, right? If the problem ceases, like therapists, right? There are not a lot, but there's a certain type of therapist. They don't want you to get better because you won't pay them anymore.
And even if somebody is well-meaning, there's a certain structure of therapy that is meant to never end. Group therapy is not effective for many of the things that group therapy is brought forward for. The amount of people, I think that DBT is very effective. The popularity of DBT group therapy does not exist because group therapy is the best vessel for DBT or that DBT is the most befit pedagogy for group therapy. It exists that way because those are the two most, what would I call it, structurally agreeable positions. CBT, cognitive behavioral therapies, and DBT as its natural extension for addiction, and group therapy are what the funding structure will provide. And it doesn't heal people. I think the same kind of like operating from scarcity is true with the social battery of people inside of these leftist spaces. It's not necessarily that everybody there is taking advantage. It just happens to be that the incentive structure is placed that if someone wants to, they can walk right in there and do it. If you want to go to group therapy and make it all about you, I got instructions on how to do it.
But
It's
is it
not
fair to
hard.
really think that anybody that got the degree in therapy did it because they want to take advantage of victims?
Nope. I'm not talking about the therapist. I'm talking about the people inside of the group therapy.
Also, Firechild, thank you for becoming a tier 2 member. Gang, you can be a
Holy.
member of my YouTube if you want. The benefits are you get to be a member of my YouTube. That's
It
the
does.
benefit.
It does provide a couple of special privileges. We won't speak of those though.
DM me for the extra special tier 2 and up privileges. Okay, you gotta consult me privately for that. But
I am.
Let's be clear though. I will to say this here. Foul. A lot of therapists, it is not necessarily about healing. It is about being able to get you to a place of stability within 3 months per your insurance structure. You need to close the book after 3 months. There are these other incentives going out. I don't think that people go through years of therapy in order to be manipulators. I do think that therapy is a terrible job for the brain. I do think that it is like walking through broken glass and thorns and showing up to a molten lava lake and then saying, this is fine. This is totally fine.
It's a
Finding a
double-edged
way to
sword, though.
not let it penetrate your soul. And some people, they're not successful at it. And they're also, a lot of people, frankly, they're not good at it.
It's a
They're not
double-edged
good at
sword,
it.
though. Do you think firefighters would be out of a job if there weren't fires? So you want firefighters are actually helping their fires.
there
It's
are a
not-
lot of well, not a lot, but there are some. It's a firebug. Like they're the hero complex of people who start fires so they can rescue people from them. That's a thing that happens.
I am not the one saying that you can't trust therapists. That's not what I'm trying to say. I'm saying, why does therapy continuously fail people? In some instances, it's because the person going into therapy doesn't actually want to heal. They are lonely, and there are two contrary incentives inside of that therapeutic relation. You have someone you are connecting to deeply, who is listening to you, who's becoming a primary connection. And what am I going to do? Am I going to keep coming once a week for an hour to be listened to and hang out with this person? If I'm a deeply lonely person, I'm probably going to keep doing that. Am I going to instead say, hey, wait a second, I have other things we should be working on that would potentially put us at odds with one another. If I have a discussion with you about the things I've done or things people have done with me, you might make me confront realities that make me uncomfortable. A natural thing to do in that instance is to just not broach the topic. A lot of therapy it slows down to a stagnant pulse because they are maintaining the one of the greatest forms of healing there is, companionship. And they're not doing it well enough because, frankly, you shouldn't be getting it from a person that talks to you 1 hour a week, maybe 2 hours a week
You should
for
get it.
money.
You should get it from a person who
should
does
get
that
it.
for money. 1 to 2 hours a day, 4 or 5 days a week on WhickTV, right? Whether that be Twitch, YouTube, or Kick, I will be there for you, and you can get all your companionship needs met through me. As long as you give me money, I will be your companion, ladies and gentlemen. Okay. Anything else from you, Foul, before we move on?
One big thing. This wasn't as painful as I thought it would be, but it was still a little bit. And if we're just going to look at it from, should progressives be more open-minded, and should they talk about things with people that they disagree with, they might feel are problematic, if you want to use buzzwords? I think that's best to at least put yourself out there, to at least give the other parties a chance to hear you out and see if maybe you could change their mind. Is it going to happen all the time? Probably not even most of the time. But let's face it, the political lines are pretty well drawn. But
Oh, can I ask you a question here?
yeah, sure.
So you seem to just take it, just totally accept, consider it inescapable, the fact that this space is both social and political. Am I right to say that?
Yeah.
I think that those should be divorced. Why do you not think that?
I'm not sure what you mean.
You need to get your social needs met in a space where your political beliefs, as they form, as they shift, as they change, are not put at odds with your social needs, or else you won't be able to express your political beliefs or your social beliefs without one of them being beholden to the other.
Well, the nature of it's going to be actually social, because there's a chat there is a Discord with a chat there. I mean, people are talking about ideas.
Sure, which is why I
What we're here
think
to
that
do.
those should be non-political spaces, and that there should be political avenues of expression that are not social in character.
Why? That's the point of
because
having conversations.
because they have incentives that are in contrast with one another. They require a person to submit some part of themselves towards the other part of themselves, almost always to the effect that you are going to get a detriment from probably both.
Yeah, you definitely are going to, and it's going to be a lot of uncomfortable situations, and I think that's a good thing. And I think people do have to go
Right.
outside the comfort zone at times.
I don't believe that you're being taken out of your comfort zone. I think that you're being asked to enter somebody else's comfort zone and not make them uncomfortable within it. And sometimes that comfort zone is entirely caustic. And if the only way that you have to engage politically is to put yourself at like the crack of someone else's whip, I think that that's a bad
Have you guys
political.
have you guys heard of the platinum rule? You know what that
Nah,
is?
Is
So
that when
you know the
is
golden
that
rule, correct? Do unto
Sure.
others as you would
Yeah.
have them
Yeah,
do
yeah.
unto you, right? Well, there is this thing in certain spaces called the platinum rule, which is advertised as better than the golden rule. It's more valuable. It's do unto others as they would have you do unto them. So, don't just treat others how you would you would want to be treated in that situation. Treat others how they want to be treated in that situation. The problem with that is there are certain types of people, especially younger people, who want to be treated like the bee's knees when they're not, right? Who want to be treated like royalty when they're not, right? And I think it creates this weird kind of kowtowing. So when you talk about being in other people's comfort zones and ask not to make them uncomfortable and how that can be caustic, I think we see that play out in that kind of way, right? Where people are asked to treat others how they want to be treated, but the way they want to be treated is just over the top with deference. And I think it's a
Yeah.
problem.
It can be a problem, but I think it does definitely benefit the situation more than just having a space where we're sitting here and just criticizing one side and they're not really saying anything back and just going, well, don't listen to these guys because they're the bad ones and we're the good ones. And that's where I think this seemed to go a little bit.
Well, luckily you're here to criticize us and to push back, right?
A little bit.
A little bit.
sounds great.
Anything else you got for us before we let you go?
No, I'll let you guys get going.
Okay. Thank you for coming and thank you for calling in. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye.
What a nice man. 𝕵𝖎𝖎 says he joined the Discord. Anyone know where to join the backstage? Did you accept the rules? If you accept the rules, you should see backstage at the top. And if
It'll be under a grand category called the stage, which
Yep.
is a drop tab that has it. So maybe you're just seeing one that's called the stage. Use that drop tab.
we'll give him a minute. This will be our last caller, I think. And,
I was gonna say it looked like 𝕾𝖎𝖙 was in the backstage.
he's not anymore. I don't know where he went.
He ran like a coward.
Oh, speak of the devil.
Come
hopefully,
back.
hopefully,
Come back to
well,
me,
we'll
baby.
have two. We'll have two. We'll have 𝕾𝖎𝖙, and
We'll
if,
have
if
two.
𝕵𝖎𝖎 can figure it out, we'll get 𝕵𝖎𝖎 in here too.
How are we doing,
Yeah.
𝕾𝖎𝖙?
𝕾𝖎𝖙, what you got for us,
Good.
sir?
Tuna, why are you so sex negative?
Why am I so nice? Oh, you want to get into it? I'd love to have this departure. Sure.
All right.
One of the main reasons is that I feel like sex invades social spaces and creates a rife ground of conflict, very similar to the social political conflict. It's important to me that relationships between people be well defined and that spaces have well defined boundaries around them so that they don't fall apart at the seams, they don't create a conflict. And I think it's very important that as an online creator that you have a boundary between you and the people you engage with on the sexual level, not even just
You brought
viewers,
me back.
other
You brought me
creators.
back.
Wait,
There's
so
a
you're
boundary
saying
there.
I don't
As a
have a
creator,
chance
yes.
to chip? Okay, fair enough.
You
Say it again?
Yeah, well.
Say it again, Wick.
It was a joke. I was saying, so
Okay,
you're
sure,
saying
sure,
that you're
you're
just
good.
cutting me off? Okay, I don't have a
See,
chance.
this is why you're single.
Wick single?
No, you.
I'm not single.
Oh, okay. Oh, well, congratulations then. I was like, why you? I thought you were single and you were one of the great many forever alones that we have here online.
I've basically never been alone. Every time a
okay.
relationship ends, I get back in one at least within a month. I think I've never been alone for more than a month.
That okay, maybe we have to have a
It's not bad.
discussion. I think being alone is important, especially before you enter any major relationship, right? I think
What do you
long
think?
term.
Alone? Do you think that I have not? I'm not a very needy person. I am a person has gone through therapy to talk about connection and my particular virtues against it. I'm currently in probably the closest I've ever had to a high commitment relationship I've ever had, and it's not been due to my nature. It's been against my nature, and through discussions I've had with myself
enough.
about my future. So
Fair enough, right?
Wow.
But I think that in general, you may be a exception to the rule, but in general, people who have never been single, right, who just go from relationship to relationship,
it
serial
depends on what your
monogamy,
definition of single is.
if you will.
It depends on what you're like, what constitutes a relationship to you. But I'm always in some form of romantic,
enough.
sexual, or something.
Okay.
I just haven't had that break. So when it comes to like the forever alone stuff, what
It's
he
an
thought,
aside. It's an aside, right? But serial monogamy is a problem. And anyway,
You go from being babied by your mother to being babied by another partner, and you never really learn to take care of yourself. Are you a professional gamer, Tuna? That's what I need to know.
am I a professional gamer? Oh, of course not. I work in television.
Okay.
We've talked about this.
Yeah. But you know how to take care of yourself. So you've had the quality of being alone. You've had the quality of learning to grow up and learning to sort of thrive on your own, even if, you've got a friend on the side.
Oh yeah, I'm an independent person. I mean, I was homeless multiple times. One time I was homeless for a little over 2 years, living out of a car, working approximately like 80 to 100 hours a week. I have the ability to really implement labor and hard work and focus towards a goal. The only reason I have a mortgage as a person who is working class coming from Gen Y is because I went extreme into the ability to be alone. I'm not the type
I'm
of
really
person.
fascinated now. How do you have a girlfriend while you're homeless? Or a
I
relationship?
didn't
well,
let
you
her
can have
know.
a girlfriend while you're homeless. Why couldn't you?
Wow.
So I
You didn't stay at her place.
I spent $10 a month on Planet Fitness. I would go there and exercise and shower daily. I would live inside my car. I would clean my car out, go vacuum it, shop vac and everything. And then one of the jobs that I had is I worked at a Amazon distro. If there's one thing you know about Amazon, it's that they're in the middle of nowhere where there isn't really a security guard just going car to car checking, of all things, a Toyota Prius to see if somebody is sleeping underneath a blanket inside of it. They would only really be checking on something really suspicious, like a trailer or something. So I would go there, work my 10 and a half, drive back down to the Platinum Fitness, do my social things, go to the library, do the internet, go on a date maybe. 5 of the days of the week, I was doing one job. Or I should say 3 of those days I was doing 2 jobs, and then every other day I was doing 1 job. I would very often then drive to the other job, and then I would drive back up to the Amazon, sleep in the parking lot, wake up, and go to work. And I did that for about 2 years because you need to have, if anybody doesn't know, and if you want to get yourself a mortgage, you need 2 years steady employment for that income to be passable. And ideally, it should be not 1099. You can't just be a trucker and make a shit ton of money. You need multiple W-2s to get the income base for a loan. Anyway, but yeah, now I've got a mortgage. I work a lot less, and I've got a girlfriend who I give a lot more time to.
Gang,
She's
we're learning.
my Amazon fulfillment.
We're learning the hidden tuna lore today. I didn't know that.
That's a
but
major
fair enough.
grind set. I'll give you props for that. Good grind.
It goes
set.
deeper than that. I've slept. I've slept in recycling bins. I woke up once to a recycling bin shaking because the metal arms had gone into its side, and I got out just in time to not be crushed inside of the paper crusher. Very, very fun stuff. So yeah, I will not. And this is even supposed to be braggadocio because I know that those weren't good times. I'm trying to say, yeah, I've actually probably experienced a lot more independent growth and struggle than a lot of people. I wasn't like in the arms of a mother passed on to the arms of a girl. It was
Okay.
quite a bit of
Noted.
independent struggle.
Noted. Gang, it's been great. It's been fun.
Is Haas giving up?
But yeah,
guess
I
so.
don't know if we're gonna see Hoth.
Haas, you can be. you can
Seattle, thank you
be in
for
my
calling
chat
in.
like you have
See
many
you later,
times.
buddy. But Tuna, it's been a great discussion. Thank you to my audience. Thank you to my viewers. Thank you to the donos, right? Gang, content's been slow these past past couple weeks because of again, some of you may know, I had a personal loss. My dog passed away.
Oh, I'm
a
sorry.
couple Fridays. It happens. It really tore me up, but we're getting better. We're gonna get to it. So like this week's gonna be slow, but next week, gang, we're putting together a full lineup. Okay. So Monday we're gonna talk about the cash report that dropped. Okay. Tuesday we're gonna have call-ins. Thursday we're gonna talk about DEI specifically. We're gonna get some more. I'm still working on shows for Wednesday and Friday, but we're gonna get a full slate done. What we're gonna do right now is we're gonna raid into Tuna Chip, and Tuna Chip has something for you, I'm sure. So gang, remember to
Here, I'm about to
spam
go
those
live.
emotes.
I'll take care of that in a second. I'm
Okay.
just getting everything set up real quick.
Okay, once you're set up, let me know, and I'll hit that raid button.
Will
Gang,
do.
thanks again. If you like the show, hit that follow button, hit that subscribe button. Feel free to donate, become a member, subs, bits, super chats, all those help. Thanks again. I'll see you guys. There might be a show Friday. I don't know. I'm still trying to put it together. But if not, I'll see you guys Monday. Are you ready?
In just one moment, I gotta just put some details in, and then I'm hitting live for you.
Okay.
Okay, live after Wick. What's up?
Cool. We good?
And we're live. We're streaming.
Beautiful. Bye-bye.
Thanks, man.
Bye.
See ya.